Alister Crowley and the Montauk Project, a 100-year-old connection. In a previous article, a discussion on how Alister Crowley had in 1918 performed a magical ceremony, Crowley secured a portrait of a being which bore a remarkable likeness to entities commonly referred to as gray aliens. Some researchers have cited this drawing as evidence that Crowley had successfully opened an interdimensional portal, which resulted in the present day wave of UFO sightings. But Crowley wasn't done yet, and New York for him turned out to be a synchronistic hotspot during that auspicious year in 1918. Researchers have subsequently linked him to various other UFO-related phenomena that would define the century to come. In the Aeon of Horus, many of our major UFO-related conspiracies, from alien abductions to the Montauk Project, have revealed themselves to be a legitimate offspring of Alister Crowley's fecund influence from 100 years ago. In the summer of 1918, Crowley, while living in New York City, went to Montauk, Long Island, on a magical retreat, the details of which remain a mystery still, though some researchers believe it is somehow linked to the weird goings-on that would be ascribed to the secret U.S. government program conducted at Camp Hero, known as the Montauk Project. Peter Moon writes in The Montauk Revisited, Adventures in Synchronicity, that Crowley may have been creating wormholes from the physical realm to other realities and back again, and how the bizarre manipulations of Montauk and the Philadelphia could have been elaborate physical deployments at simply one of the very powerful Crowley magician. The origins of the Montauk Project are murky indeed and date back to 1943 aboard the USS Eldridge, where research into radar invisibility was being conducted in what would be referred to as the Philadelphia experiment, resulting in stealth as well as other technologies. Though successful, the experiment allegedly caused a drastic side effect, transporting sailors into another dimension and back again, only to leave them in a state of complete mental confusion or worse, implanted inside the bulkhead of the ship itself. After the war ended, the director of the program, one Dr. John Van Neumann, was given a new directive to study the human mind and its inability to withstand interdimensional travel without going insane. Toward this end, Neumann conducted experiments which linked people's minds to computers, eventually succeeding in capturing human thought through esoteric crystal radio receivers, then storing them in a computer information bits. This capability was apparently enhanced to the point where thought patterns could be displayed on a computer screen and printed on paper. From this technology, sinister methods for mind control were considered, and a report was presented to Congress for funding, who in turn shut the project down for fear of being mind-controlled themselves. Subsequently, the project was secretly revived by the military as a black ops program, and a facility was chosen in the late 1960s at Camp Hero in Montauk, which housed a Sage radar antenna that emitted a frequency of 400 to 425 megahertz, used for assessing the human mind and controlling it. Ultimately, however, the program got out of control, and then the project's top psychic, Duncan Cameron, while in the Montauk chair, powered and thought-enhancing crystals amplified by radar, unleashed a monster from his subconscious which destroyed the facility and ended the project altogether. Preston Nichols and Peter Moon believed that the most spectacular discovery they made, the Montauk Project, was linked to the most famous occultist of all times, Alister Crowley, often referred to as the wickedest man in the world, communicate with disembodied entities and traveled interdimensionally. It was even suggested that the interdimensional nature of the Philadelphia experiment could have been the outward expression of Crowley's magical operations. In their research, they found that, in addition to Crowley visiting Montauk in 1918, there were numerous connections between Duncan Cameron's family and Crowley. The name Duncan Cameron even appears in Crowley's autobiography. Cameron was the name of Jack Parsons' wife, and Scarlet Woman, who assisted Crowley, devotee Jack Parsons, in the 1947 Babylon working, which allegedly opened an interdimensional portal. Some other synchronicities include the fact that historical records show that Native American Montauk tribe sold the Montauk land to the townspeople of East Hampton on August 6, 1660. The Indians subsequently received a counter bond deed on February 6, 1661, to secure their rights to occupy said land. And the writers point out that Crowley, the Beast 666, the Antichrist of the Book of Revelations. Some general theories as to why the area attracts such weirdness includes the possibility of a portal or stargate in the vicinity. Or perhaps there's an influence coming from the nearby Montauk sacred burial grounds. The Montauk mythology was the basis for the Netflix series Stranger Things. At the very least, we find it extraordinary that Crowley has managed to worm his way into the script of a truly endearing modern mythos. And it turns out that Crowley has done the same for yet another 14 drama, The Alien Abduction of Betty and Barney Hill and Crowley. On the evening of September 19, 1961, Betty and Barney Hill were driving south on Route 3 through the White Mountains. Betty spotted a bright object in the sky, which she initially took to be a falling star. Thought it was falling upward. Noticing that the object was moving erratically, Betty and Barney pulled the car over to take a closer look, as well as to walk their dog, Delcy. The Hills continued to drive, and at about 1 mile south of Indian Head, the flying object descended rapidly toward their vehicle, causing the Hills to stop the car in the middle of the road. The object, shaped like a flying cigar, 80 to 100 feet long, filled with entire field of view and of their windshield. Barney jumped out of the car and, using his binoculars, claimed to have seen 8 to 11 humanoid figures described as somewhat not human. Barney returned to the vehicle and, fearing capture, quickly drove away. Betty and Barney then experienced amnesia, and the next thing they knew was that they were 35 miles farther along on their journey, with 2 hours missing and unaccounted for. 3 years later, the Hills underwent regression hypnosis in an attempt to retrieve their lost memory. The Hills were able to recall an experience of an abduction by aliens and claimed to be from the Zeta Reticuli system. After a physical examination by the aliens, the Hills had their memories erased, returned to the car, and began the era of the alien abduction scenario. But how does Alister Crowley fit into this scenario? Well, as you may recall, Crowley was living in New York in 1918. But before he moved there, Crowley lived in, you guessed it, New Hampshire, near a town called Bristol, located less than an hour away from where the Hills experienced their alien abduction. It was the year of 1916. While in New Hampshire, Crowley, according to Richard Cavendish in History of Magic, promoted himself to the rank of Magus. In New Hampshire, Crowley had his own paranormal visitations with a type of glowing orb. This experience affected Crowley enough for him to write and submit a letter for publication to the New York Times, and the letter reads, "To the editor of New York Times, I do not know whether global lightings is a sufficiently rare phenomenon in this country to merit remark. Yesterday, a globe of fire with an apparent diameter of about a foot burst on the floor in the middle room of a cottage here and within a few inches of my right foot. Curiously enough, no damage of any kind was done. Alister Crowley, New Bristol, New Hampshire, July 13th, 1916. Writer and researcher Christopher Knowles notes on his website that the highway which links Crowley's home in New Hampshire to the Hills abduction spot, is Interstate 93. Furthermore, Knowles states that the aliens which abducted the Hills deposited them in the town which Crowley was living in. At the time, Knowles states that 35 miles down the road ensured that the Hills would have woken up in the very same town in which Crowley was actually living in 1916, Hebron, Bristol. Let me repeat that. The Hills woke up from their missing time episode in the very same town that Alister Crowley had lived just months before his own contact experience in the Alamantra working. According to the occultists, opened up an interdimensional portal which put the magician in contact with a being he refers to as Lamb. And we have mentioned the Hills themselves came into contact with beings during their abduction and during their regression therapy, created a composite drawing of those beings. Now, if we compare this portrait with a portrait of Crowley's Lamb, we note a remarkable similarity. At this point in the narrative, we might start thinking of Crowley as the paranormal equivalent of a photobomber. His face keeps popping up at all pivotal junctures in 14 history. Does this give truth to the claim that Crowley is the prophet of a new Aeon of Horus? Or are these connections ascribed to him by overzealous fanboys? Do we even know if the great beast himself gave any credence to the field of ufology? This may be hard to establish for telling. Crowley passed away at the very dawn of the UFO flat in the year 1947, the same year which ushered in the modern-day wave of UFO sightings. The terminology, like flying saucer and UFO, didn't even exist during his time. To discern his thinking, we need to look for clues, which he left a few. Let's turn our attention to the Book of Thoth and the Alister Crowley, a divinatory tarot deck painted by Lady Frida Harris according to guidelines and instructions set by Crowley himself. Take a look at the 7th trump card, the Chariot, for there is something curious about this card. The card depicts a chariot clothed in armor, sitting cross-legged inside a chariot drawn by 4 cherubs and bull, lion, eagle, and a man. There is a blue canopy on the chariot, which according to Crowley represents Binah, the feminine principle, and scarlet wheels representing Gibra, the principle of energy. Everything is in fact quite standard to the symbolism found in a traditional version of this card, except for one anomaly. The charioteer is holding in his hands what appears to be a rotating flying saucer. Crowley says his version of the card is much influenced by the trump portrayed by Eliphas Levi, and indeed, many of the same motifs are present in both cards. Sans the saucer, if Crowley's Holy Grail is not literally a cup, then he must be using the term metaphorically to denote a goal of great significance, as in the Arthurian quest, which set the Knights of the Round Table on a mission searching for the elusive Grail. Can this quest then be the search for extraterrestrial life? Consider Crowley's description again in a different light. The wording could just as easily be used to describe a UFO, like light in the darkness. Rays, moreover, revolved and Jupiterian element. If Crowley is dropping hints here that he is in fact talking about a UFO, then the 7th trump in the perfect place to drop it, for the term chariot is often used by the ancients to denote the modes of transport used by flying gods or aliens, as discussed in the greater detail of Erich von Däniken in the Book of Chariots of the Gods. In this light, Fox Mulder television series The X-Files could be viewed as a modern iteration of the medieval archetype of a knight of the Round Table, searching for truth in the Holy Saucer. As they say, the truth is out there.